Ann?
Here.
Jeannie?
Here.
Steve? Here. Larry?
Here.
Daisha?
Here.
And Stacy may be showing up a little later. Notice of meeting.
The meeting was properly noticed.
I need a motion to adopt the agenda. So moved.
Second.
All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to start tonight. We don't have a spotlight tonight, but we're going to start with salutes and recognitions. Any board member like to offer up some salutes or a recognition? Daisha?
I'd like to recognize Lisa O'Hearn, Sarah Colburn, Amanda Chack, and Nikki Sandvik. The second session of summer school started today,
Okay,
and seems like things are running pretty smoothly.
fantastic. All right. Anyone else? I'll open it up to the administration then.
I don't have any salutes this evening.
Nope.
Actually, I would do one. I'm going to salute Sandy Krakowski for all the work that she's done to support Danielle and her efforts to organize Leadership Week for the administration this week.
Well, thank you for that. If that is it for salutes and recognitions, we'll move down to citizen comments. There's the rules that are on the board. Please make sure you direct your comments to the board or the administrators, not to other people in the audience, if you would. The very first one I have is from Carla Utler.
Tell me when to go.
Yep.
Good evening. I am Charles Beitler, Village of Pewaukee resident, parent. Dr. Katie is aware of this. I was informed, and it's a concern that I have, and I have not heard back from Mr. Behrens, that coaches are asking kids if they're vaccinated. That's unacceptable. Coaches, automatically they should be released. They should be let go. That's none of their business. If they're concerned about it, they should wear a mask. It's a summer program. We have a mask optional for summer program, correct?
Correct. Yep.
These are things that should not be asked. And coaches are asking the girls varsity cheer whether or not they are vaccinated. And that is completely unacceptable. I mean, I'm not gonna have my kid go to sports and every time she goes to sports, they were asking if they got vaccinated. No. I mean, when does it stop?
Yeah, and you had sent that email, and I responded to you this morning and told you that that's correct, that coaches should not be asking students about their vaccination status, and Mr. Behrens would follow up with the coach.
Correct. And what will be the repercussions of her actions?
Well, that'll be between Mr. Behrens and the coach. But we also have to always give a coach the opportunity to respond, and maybe they misunderstood what the expectations are, but we'll certainly make that clear that asking students about their vaccination status is not something that they should be doing.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Charla.
Next on the list, I have Allison Belt.
Sure.
All right. Donna Teagham.
Well, I am back.
Welcome back, Donna.
Thank you. Just welcome to all. My name is Donna Teagham, North 26, West 26285, Quail Hollow Road. 14-year residents of this community and grandparents of 4 teenage grandkids. One that graduated in 2020, one that's a senior, and granddaughters that are freshmen, 2 granddaughters, twins. 2 weeks ago, I gave a short history lesson of the progress for girls and women participating in many sports from grade school, high school, college, professional teams, and even the Olympics. We have records of excellence kept at all levels. Now, today, the greatest heartache and concern is that all of this progress for girls is going to be destroyed. We now have switched ruling by science, and we're ruling by feelings. Boys and men who feel they are girls are being allowed to be on girls' teams and use their private space in the locker rooms. We have a president, a governor, and yes, I fear even some of you school board members who support this policy. It doesn't take a scientist to tell you God created huge differences between men and women. In Genesis 1:27, so God created mankind in his own image. He created them male and female. And I personally do not care what a man does to his body and what gets cut off or not. But as a scientist, his DNA will always be ruled as a male. Because I was too long. In closing, I just have a couple of concerns about this because we saw it coming for about 3 years now. Our granddaughters were playing in a select soccer team from Madison. There were 5 boys on a roster of 12. Now, do you think this is really fair? And then, of course, I think 2 weeks ago, I mentioned about the 2 girls from out east who were star track and field. Girls had state records, and they allowed 2 men onto the team, which meant that 2 girls who should have been on the team weren't on the team, broke their records, and they lost everything. And I think that's and there's lawsuits on that presently. But in closing, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions to 2 of the female members of the board. The alarm went off. I can't ask my question.
You can take, if they're brief, you can go ahead and
Yes,
ask.
they are. I went on the website. First one is to Darcy Hawkins. I saw on the website that you were a Division I hockey player for the University of Minnesota, and I just wanted to congratulate you. But I wanted to ask you, how would you feel if you had a member on your team, a man playing on your team and using your locker room facilities, or if you would be competing against men on another team? And then I had a question also for Mrs. Jean Whittam. A couple of school board meetings ago, you stated you had changed school documents to read with gender-neutral pronouns. Did this action go before the board, and did you all have a vote on this? I would like to know also who's paying for this. Also, I'll just leave it at that. If I get questions answered on that, I'd be very happy tonight. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
thank you, Donna.
Follow up there, Mike? Kelly Belt?
Hello.
Hi, Kelly.
I just want to talk tonight, we've mentioned a couple of times about fair and unbiased teaching and getting a policy in place. And I don't want that to fall off the radar now that we're moving on to COVID policies tonight and then kind of getting into a gap of board meetings here. So I just think it's very important to have this policy. Teachers that drift off topic and teach their own ideologies need to be held accountable. As board and administrators, you have claimed that CRT is not being taught in the schools. I do agree that you're not teaching actual CRT, but the concept seems to be embedded in the school itself and pushed in multiple areas. On that topic, I have actually been reviewing the WEAC website. For those in the audience that don't know, that's essentially the teachers union for the state of Wisconsin. And I feel even more strongly about needing a fair and unbiased teaching policy with strict disciplinary action after reviewing this website. This policy will not only be effective for CRT-like topics, but political topics, as well as you will hear from my daughter tonight, general biased teaching on one particular topic that she's going to give an example on. So here's the summary of what I found on the WEAC website. WEAC is an NEC affiliate. That is the large teachers union that is promoting and fighting for CRT in schools. As a member of WEAC, you're also a member of NEC. NEC is starting a campaign to target parents like us and are fighting us parents because they want to continue to teach our kids what they want against our wishes. They are also offering protection, legal protection to teachers who may end up under some of these disciplinary actions for teaching such things that may not be allowed in the school. Every member of WEAC gets a free copy of a book called Democracy in Chains, A Deep History of the Radical Right Stealth Plan for America. As if the title isn't bad enough, here is a summary. Author Nancy McLean shows how the radical right has forged ideas about government in the last gasp attempt to preserve the white elite's power in the wake of Brown versus the Board of Education. Democracy in Chains is a thorough examination of the 20th century efforts to undermine democratic systems through slow, methodical, and intentional erosion and manipulation of the democratic system. McLean clearly articulates and lays out evidence that the right's capitalistic interests are to maintain property for the wealthy and to reduce access to education and intergenerational mobility to the many. In addition to receiving a copy of this book, they can also take a 2-hour book study with the author for free. Why is this a book they get and not one simply on teaching topics? There are many articles on their advocacy page. The president of WEAC has an article out there titled, Reckless Conduct by Republicans Endangers Students. An article titled, Educators Refuse to Lie to Young People About U.S. History. That title doesn't sound bad on the surface. There is a paragraph here that I wanted to read, but I'm out of time. Maybe I'll come back in the second comments and read it. There's an article titled, WEA opposes proposals to limit transgender student athletes. There's a page on their website that is advocating for justice with a link for equity ambassadors. Equity, CRT term. Everything on their website is completely biased and promotes the liberal progressive agenda. And if this is the kind of stuff that the union is pushing on the teachers, how do we trust the teachers will not push this on our kids against the parents' wishes? We need to remember the parents are the activists for the kids, not the teachers' unions. They are activists for the teachers.
I just would let you know that in Pewaukee, it doesn't mean that individual teachers couldn't be members of WEAC, but we do not have a teachers union in Pewaukee. So WEAC is not, again, individual teachers may be on their own members of WEAC. I thought that would be relevant information.
How do we find out what those teachers are?
How would you find out if teachers were independently?
Come forward and say, yeah, we're all for it.
Yeah, we're going to move on to the next speaker.
Next speaker is Carrie Serbian.
Hello, Carrie. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm Carrie Serbian, and I'm the parent of an 8th grader at Asa Clark Middle School. Tonight, I would like to speak to you about the proposed COVID-19 protocols for the upcoming school year. My two main concerns are the masking recommendations and the vaccinations. Given the extremely low level of cases for our county and the continual decline of COVID-19 cases, I believe that masking should be optional for all students and staff. It's time to finally unmask our children. They've suffered through masking requirements for long enough. The negative impacts that masking has had on our children, both psychologically and physically, is overwhelming. During the June 14th school board meeting, several parents, some of whom also happened to be in the medical profession, did lots of research and provided detailed evidence about the harmful effects of masking in addition to giving their own children's personal accounts of how wearing a mask negatively impacted them. Having your child come home telling you that they can't breathe or are having headaches or that they can't concentrate in school is hard to hear as a parent. I'm pushing to have a policy in place that makes masking optional for all students for the whole school year, regardless of their age or their vaccination status. To tell the younger students that they will still have to wear a mask is going against your prior recommendation to not treat students differently based upon their vaccination status. It should be the right of a parent to decide whether or not they want their child to wear a mask or to get vaccinated. Mask mandates are lifted for the state of Wisconsin. Kids are attending summer school without masks, seeing their friends and family mask-free, going in and out of stores and restaurants without masks, and the COVID-19 case numbers continue to go down every week. So please, let's end the masking for our students. Lastly, the push for the COVID-19 vaccination of our children needs to stop. If a parent decides that it is the appropriate choice for their child, then that is their choice. Bottom line, the school district needs to respect a parent's personal choice when it comes to vaccination and to stop continually pushing this experimental, non-FDA approved vaccine on our kids. Thank you for listening to my concerns, and I hope that you will consider making masks optional for all students in the upcoming school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Carrie, I would just like to clarify that certainly with the recommendations that the board has been presented with tonight, there is no mask requirement that's recommended, nor is there any requirement for vaccination that's recommended. So in the draft recommendations that have been presented to the board, there's no recommendation for requirements of either masking or vaccination. We'll talk about it when it gets to that part, but it's a parent choice. So we'll clarify that, but I'm glad you brought it up.
So Larry, let the minutes show that Stacy's here.
Welcome, Stacy.
Yep. Next up, Katie Sokolowski.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
My name is Katie Sokolowski. For those of you that don't know me, my husband's been up here a few times. We have 3 children in the district, an almost 5th grader and 2 going to be 8th grader. As you've heard from my husband a few times, we moved here 2 years ago for the district, the education, the proven track record of success. We are engaged parents in our children's education. We have expectations not only for our children to perform, to learn, and strive to become their best self, but also for the district. We've talked about many concerns over the last few months. Today, my concerns are really focused on the declining math and ELA proficiency scores that I've been seeing. And this really focused from PLE through the 8th grade level. So I went online. It took me a few hours to kind of find what I would feel like appear to be credible resources for what I'm going to talk about today. So first, I'm going to talk about the Public School Review, which provided the following results for Pewaukee District. PLE, specifically, ranked 33 out of 84 middle schools in Waukesha County. Math proficiency is at 71%. Reading is at 64. The student-teacher ratio is 16-1 versus the state level at 14-1. ASA is ranked 14 out of 30 in middle schools in Waukesha County. Math is at 60%, reading proficiency at 61%. The student-teacher ratio is 17-1 versus the state average of 14-1. Years ago, these math and ELA proficiency percentages were in the 90s for Pewaukee. I asked myself, what changed? And how can we turn it around? How can we make it better? I'm not an expert in statistics, but would like to share with you a few stats from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. And unfortunately, due to the coronavirus and the Wisconsin Act 185, all of those federal academic assessment requirements were suspended or waived for this last calendar year. So what we're going to talk about next is the 2018-2019 school year. So for that time period, the district received a score of 83.9. The year before was 82, so we did go up a little bit. Looking for a local comparison, again, I'm not from around here. I don't have any bias or want or expectation of one district for another. I looked at Heartland. It's close, it's similar to Pewaukee, and I looked through K through 8th grade. No high school. They received, so Pewaukee is at a score of 83.9. The year prior was 82. So Heartland received a score of 92, 8 points higher than Pewaukee in total. There are a couple of different subcategories that roll up to that total score. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of them, and I only have 8 seconds left. Pewaukee came in at 82.6 for student achievement. Pretty split between math and ELA. Heartland was 97.6, 15 points higher than Pewaukee. District growth, Pewaukee 75.6, Heartland 89.8, 14 points higher than Pewaukee. Again, I ask myself, what changed? How can we turn this around? What are they doing in Heartland that we are not? And Heartland is not immune to low scores. In 2013, they received a score of 80.3. And in 2 years, they were in the mid-90s. In 2 years, they turned it around 15 points. How can we improve to be better than our neighboring districts and be the leader in education? I would like to understand the board's perspective on the declining proficiencies, what actions have been taken, what goals have been set to improve the scores, and to continue to raise the bar for the children. I am confident that this can be turned around to show our children that we, the adults, also need to strive to be the best that we can be. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Katie.
Danielle, can you follow up with her tomorrow or something?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And now, if prepared, she's prepared, Allison Belt.
Come on down, Allison.
When I was in 5th grade, I was told to write a persuasive essay on if climbing Mount Everest should be allowed or not. I was told to write it over 3 days, the first day being for research, the second for drafting, and the third for revising. I was not allowed to write at home or use any resources other than the ones my teacher provided me. I was only given sources on the side that it should not be allowed to climb Mount Everest. And I wanted to write my essay that it should be allowed. So I spent the first 2 days trying to find information on that it should be allowed to climb Mount Everest. But I could not with the information that my teacher gave me. I talked to some of my classmates and they agreed that the resources only gave one side of the story. So they ended up changing their essay to the opinion my teacher clearly wanted to write about. When I approached my teacher about my concern on the resources she gave to me, she blew it off and didn't seem to care. On the second day, I went home and told my parents about the situation, only having one more day to work on my essay and more information. I found my own resources and finished my essay. I still went ahead and did my essay on my beliefs because I will not be bullied into silencing my opinion. This is just one small example of biased teaching within the Pewaukee School District.
Thank you, Allison.
That's all the comment cards I had. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. We have minutes from a previous meeting. I understand there's some corrections there, Larry?
Yeah, they were made earlier today. Sandy posted them on the public website and also on the board's website. So they are current and correct, and as far as I know that they're there. And
We had some correspondence and no gifts. Anybody have any questions or corrections? If not, I'll look for a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented and modified with the latest revision.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Larry. All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. That brings us down to the Business Affairs Committee meeting that met earlier tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Yeah, it was a very thorough conversation about end-of-year financials as we are at the beginning of the 2021-22 year and closing out the 2020-21 fiscal year. We went through our normal routine of looking at the check registers and seeing if there were any questions, items were in the registers. There were a few questions that came up during the review of those items earlier this weekend, and those were all addressed appropriately by John. Then we spent time really digging into the financial review of the district and went fund by fund, starting with so some of the other categories, Fund 99, 73, 50, 21, those kinds of funds, and then into our capital improvement funds, the 40s and 39, and then into Fund 27 and Fund 10. Looked at all of the variances, all the significant variances from the initial budget adopted in October of last year and revised in the year, and then versus what we ended up as. I'm very pleased that, you know, given how tumultuous of a year it was, the numbers turned out to be fairly close. Revenues came in at about $100,000 over budgeted amount, and expenses were under plan actually by 1.3 million. So a net of 1.4 positive as a result of the total year financial performance. And that there's a couple of things still yet to be resolved, but not things that will materially change the results. The places where expenses were below the budgeted amount all make sense given that we were operating in a COVID year with lots of uncertainty, things like purchase services, things like travel, which you wouldn't do as much of when you have restrictions on the amount of activities that students can do. So all to be expected kinds of adjustments and variances to what was expected. So I thought the review was thorough and satisfactory. We did talk momentarily for a few minutes about the upcoming year in terms of what to expect for 2021-22 in terms of state funding, and we also discussed that the annual audit begins on Monday. The in-person portion of that audit begins on Monday and expected to be done by the end of the week.
And when does the audit report come back? I can't remember. October?
It has to wait till after October when we get the certified results from the state. So it's usually November, John, is that when we normally get the final report?
Yeah, generally, we're in late November, early December when the audit report is complete, once the state completes their work.
There's some values that the state has to provide for the audit, for the footnoting of the report.
Correct. Thanks. Any questions for Steve? Otherwise, look for a motion to accept the business affairs report.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
7-0. Thank you. Next on the agenda is new business. Jeff Behrens is here tonight to give us the athletics and activities report.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. So 1 year ago, I was speaking and kind of preaching to our coaches, our athletes, our parents that in the wake of everything that was going on, that we really needed to change the metric of success for the year. And instead of focusing on wins and championships, we needed to keep the safety of our athletes in mind. And really focus on providing opportunities for kids. And with that said, I'm proud to say that we completed all of our athletic seasons, albeit some of them were modified schedules, but we completed all of the schedules that were set before our teams and our athletes. And I have to thank our coaches for doing a tremendous job in doing that and keeping, again, the safety and the opportunity available for our kids. With that being said, we had one of the most accomplished athletic years that we've had in as recent history as far as I could go back in my limited research. We had 8 conference championships out of 18 conference sports. We had 4 regional championships, 2 sectional championships, obviously a state championship. We had 17 individual state qualifiers, and we had 3 conference athletes of the year in their respective sports. So while we did a tremendous job and we succeeded at providing opportunities, we also did a heck of a job in competition. You guys have been given my reports, but I just want to touch on a couple of the highlights. Even with the year, our participation rates didn't go down. Where we didn't quite see that across the conference or the rest of the state, particularly in the spring sports with females. Other schools experienced drop-off rates in girls' sports, especially in the spring, but we did not. One of the speculations out there is the fact that COVID really had an impact on that. If you go back 2 years ago, that spring season was the season that was lost. And one of the I guess speculations is that some of the girls who might have been lower level, younger ages, and maybe where softball or soccer or track wasn't a significant part of their life, but maybe they were just doing it to be with their friends, and they had a year of not doing it. Maybe they realized that it just wasn't something that they needed to do. For example, in our conference of 14 schools, for girls soccer, only 5 schools, including us, were able to field a JV soccer team. We're hoping that bounces back, but for Pewaukee High School, again, our participation rates didn't go down, so we're very happy for that. The next thing I want to talk about is our academic accomplishments of our student athletes. Our student athletes did a tremendous job of being students and athletes. Out of 691 student athletes, 438, or 63% of our student athletes, were scholar athletes, which means they had a GPA of 3.5 or higher. So just a tremendous amount. 63% of our student athletes accomplished that. Our girls tennis team, for example, I want to highlight them. They had an average GPA for their team of 3.87. They had 46 girls out for tennis, and they had an average GPA of 3.87. 42 out of 46 of them were scholar athletes. Just a tremendous job. Moving on to the appendices part of the athletic report. First thing I want to notice is the athletic training report. Our athletic training, I want to remind you that we get for free in our partnership with Pro Healthcare. We had 113 injuries that required some sort of practice, game, or season modification or a reference to a referral to a doctor or surgery. And our athletic trainer, who was new this year, she did a tremendous job. She saw 1,484 daily screens. So and a screen could be anything from an athlete needing ice, needing a Band-Aid, needing rehab, anything like that. So almost 1,500 student athletes were seen by our athletic trainer, and again, made possible for free by our partnership with Pro Healthcare. So just wanted to highlight that, and again, she does a tremendous job. Also in those appendices, you'll see all of our all-conference athletes, both first and second team. We had 80 athletes earn first or second team all-conference, and then that last appendix is the conference standings for all of our sports. Moving on to our activities report. With our activities, we weren't able to run several of our activities, so our participation rate was down a little bit for that, where we had 618 students involved in our activities program. Typically, that's usually around 1,300, but again, we don't have 1,300 students, just to clarify. Some of them are involved in multiple activities. I would anticipate that number to be right back up next year with full participation. But the one thing I do want to note is that we had 718 students participate in either athletics or activities. That represents 83% of our student body. One of the things that I strive for is for all of our students to be involved in something. studies have shown that when students are involved in something that connects them to their high school experience, they are more successful, they have higher GPAs, they have a better experience. They're just connected to their experience. So while I may have a goal of 100% participation, obviously knowing that we're not going to have all 866 of our students participate in something, 83%, while not participating, not running some of our activities, 83% is a great number. I hope that, again, that goes up and we still can pull in some of those students that we didn't this year, but all in all, a very successful year athletics and activities wise. Any questions?
Any questions for Jeff? Ann?
Jeff, I'm looking at the list of things that didn't take place, and do you expect all of them to come back? I was a little concerned about the leadership club.
So Leadership Club, one of the big differences with that is we now have that as a class. Paul Hassman now teaches a leadership class.
Okay.
It takes a lot of the same principles. In the past, our Leadership Club was primarily, actually before I got here, it was basically the captains.
That's correct.
The captains were brought in as the Leadership Club and they met once a month. When I came in here, I kind of expanded a little bit larger and said, hey, you don't have to have the captain title to be part of this club, and so it was a nomination basis. But now Paul Hassman has expanded it, and he had 2 sections this year, and I think it's going to be even more next year. So
Didn't they have responsibilities too when it came to like homecoming and things like that? Is that
yes.
changed then?
Student Senate, they didn't have as many responsibilities as you think,
Okay.
but they took some of the stuff from Student Senate, and now it's all under Student Senate.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Stacy?
Can we give a board salute to Rihanna, the trainer? Even though she's not an official employee.
I think so, yeah.
I would like to. My child was one of the many numbers that just quantified. She had debilitating shin splints all year, and Rihanna went above and beyond, treating her and talking with Mark and I and coming up with plans and referring us to specialists and everything. She was phenomenal.
She is. She does a great job.
Thank you for that. We'll put it in the minutes. Any other questions for Jeff on the year in review? No?
I just want to congratulate you on such good results and acknowledge you for your leadership in everything that you did from, we talked a little bit about it today, starting last summer, putting opportunities for summer contact together once we were no longer closed after, as we got to July 1st. And under these circumstances, to have that level of participation, to successfully complete all athletic seasons, you're to be commended for the work you did to make sure that those opportunities were available for students. So thank you.
I think that gets an applause.
Parents aren't always easy to deal with, I'm sure. I'm sure you had lots of difficult conversations.
It was all to preserve opportunities for kids.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Well, we're going to keep going with the Jeff Barron show and have him talk about the code of conduct for activities and athletics.
And I would just point out, that there's been no changes to the code of conduct. We put that on there in case board had any questions. So there's no action that's necessary since there are no changes, but Jeff's here to answer any questions that you might have.
Does anybody have any?
Do we anticipate going back to random drug testing and putting everything back to normal? I mean, a lot of that was disrupted this last year.
Yeah, I anticipate that's the direction we'll go. That would, I believe that would be a directive from the board.
Yeah, we have that policy was suspended this year because of the situation, but that is the plan is to re-implement that policy in the fall.
Excellent.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Jeff.
All right,
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Under new business now, the next item is the operations plan for the coming school year.
Yeah, so in your packet, you have the recommendations for the fall operational plan in relation to COVID-19. As I stated in my comments to you, and it was mentioned by one of our speakers tonight, the data in the community is excellent. right now. We use 3 different burden models. All of them are in the green. So we have very low rates currently. Just this past week, I'm sure you're aware, the CDC came out with new school-based guidelines. And there's, much of that is mirrored in these recommendations that you have for your consideration. And this is also reflective of action that the board took in May regarding elements like masking for the fall. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through the pieces of the plan. We did some differentiation. Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
You can show and display on the screen.
Sandy, can you display are you able to pull that out of the packet and display that? The plan was in the public side of the board pack as well. So as she's working on that, I'll kind of walk you through. So, we've really referred to this as phase 4 post-vaccine in terms of the stage that we're in. The plan that was implemented last year went from phase 0 to phase 3, as you will recall. Phase 0 being fully virtual. Phase 3 was when we were back 5 days in person, and in between we had hybrid models that were in place. So we were into phase 3 around February in all schools. We were in phase 2 in the elementaries after the first 3 weeks of school last year. Just to kind of give you a real brief history lesson. But we have a little bit of differentiation here because we got 2 environments, one that has access to vaccination, one that does not. So there are some differences between those environments. Current projections are that all students in grades 7 through 12 would have had access to, if their family chooses, to have them vaccinated. And again, I'd reiterate, and this was brought up tonight, there's no recommendations for requiring vaccination for any students, with the belief that is a family choice to do that for their child. But it does create differences in the environment in terms of having access. So for grades that have full access, and provided a working definition of what that means. So in environments in which students have had access to vaccine equal to or greater than 2 months past the initial eligibility date, they would be defined as having full access. And the rationale for that is currently the Pfizer vaccine is the one that's available. It's a 2-shot regimen, so if you figure the 2-shot regimen and adequate time for parents to access that, again, if they choose for their child, that is a workable time frame to meet that definition. So in those environments, pretty straightforward. Wearing face coverings indoors and outdoors optional. I do have a note on there that currently something out of our control is the federal government has a requirement on buses, all public transportation. We can't overrule the federal government, so that does exist. But beyond that, in all environments, face coverings would be optional per these recommendations. As we go to younger grade levels, where they don't, there's a few more pieces in place. And I appreciate Carrie bringing this up in her comments because I want to make sure it's very clear. It's really kind of a nuance to say recommended versus optional. And the reason for that nuance is simply to reflect CDC guidelines that they recommend that individuals in non-vaccinated situations, they recommend wear masks. As it says here, parenthetically, right after the statement of wearing face coverings is recommended, not required, so absolutely a parent choice. Indoors for students and non-vaccinated staff, that simply reflects communicating what the recommendations are so our parents have full awareness of what the public health recommendations are. So it's really a nuance, it is still a parent choice per these recommendations. In terms of outdoor environments, and again, this reflects what the public health information is in terms of the extremely low transmission in outdoor environments, that wearing of face coverings in all outdoor environments would be optional. Again, I have a note in there about the federal requirement on school buses. Again, in both cases, in both environments, if that federal requirement changes, then our requirement on school buses would reflect that recommended or that optional status. There are some additional pieces that we would have in place for elementary students in that 4K through 6 until they meet that full vaccination eligibility, and that is the practice of some cohorting. And again, cohorting, as a reminder, is a mitigation strategy in which students, you just kind of do some things to limit cross interaction between groups, across classes and houses in some different schools. It just reduces some of the chance for spread with those. So some interactions may be limited between classrooms or houses in the elementary schools. Social distancing strategies would still be implemented in indoor environments between students when they're outside of their cohorts. This would primarily be a lunch piece, and the recommendations are really 3 feet, 3 to 6 feet is what we would try to do as practical. Similar to some of the stuff that we did with lunches last year. Right now, the projection that we keep hearing is that 5-year-olds and up may have access to vaccine September, October. That would kind of give you a sense of a timeline for some of these minor differences to change from a partial or no access to a full access situation. Again, just want to be clear, the basic differences are just language of we are recommending this because that is the public health communication versus purely optional in those indoor environments, and some additional uses of cohorting and social distancing in those environments until families have the option of having their children vaccinated. And then pieces that would be applied to all environments, we continue to manage metrics and we'd communicate our data. So the district will maintain a dashboard to monitor incidents of infection and quarantine in the school system. The information will be regularly communicated to parents and staff as we did last year. Sanitation, hygiene, and ventilation. We made the investment in those bipolar ionization HVAC systems, so that is a permanent improvement to ventilation, which plays a good role in viral mitigation. Again, continuing to maintain an emphasis on hand washing and access to hand sanitizer. These are all things reflected in the new CDC recommendations, which really aren't all that new. They're the same as, some of these are the same as we've had in the past. Symptom monitoring and contact tracing. We would, again, maintain enhanced symptom monitoring of staff and students. Just very strong emphasis on those with viral symptoms should stay home. People with symptoms that are reflective of COVID-19 are encouraged to get tested before returning to school, and that students and staff should be symptom-free, such as no fever, no vomiting, unmedicated for a minimum of 24 hours before returning to school. That's frankly the same expectation we've always had, that students with those kind of symptoms should be symptom-free and staff 24 hours unmedicated. So that's really an implementation of our standard policy. We are working on an option, again, purely as a service, certainly no requirement, that we could provide some on-site COVID-19 testing services for staff and students. Again, this is a service that would be optional. Certainly no student would be tested unless it's requested by a parent or guardian. Much like our vaccination clinics, not required, but is a service that's available that may be a convenience on site. So there is an opportunity right now through DHS for free COVID-19 testing that can be provided on school sites. So that's something that we're looking at as an option. Contact tracing practices would continue to be employed. We expect this to be much less than what we've experienced in the past, with the cases being as low. So again, if you have a positive COVID-19 individual identified, there would be contact tracing. The big difference here, and this is kind of how we operated at the end of the year. So if Steve's positive, Larry's a close contact, right? Larry, as parents, would be notified that you were a close contact, but if he's not symptomatic, the information simply goes to the parents. They can decide what to do. We'd provide them with what DHS and CDC recommends. They may opt to do a quarantine. That would be their choice, and we would provide emergency remote learning. If the student or the staff member is symptomatic, then they are considered what we call probable. So positive and probable would then complete quarantine. And that would be a 7-day with a negative test quarantine, much like we did at the end of last year, or a 10-day quarantine before returning to school. Fully vaccinated students or staff who were to have viral symptoms would be encouraged to get tested. Certainly not required to. And in those cases, if vaccinated with a negative test, you're able to return to school, or 24-hour symptom-free, able to return to school. So some difference there, if that's something someone chooses to do. We'll continue some enhanced health room and isolation procedures, like we had this past year. Students presenting with viral symptoms, in those cases, would be asked to wear a face covering, so, whatever they might be sick with, they are reducing spread of that, and they'd be isolated until they can be picked up from school or able to leave school. So older students may be able to leave right away, other students until parents can pick them up. And again, the isolation, you'll recall in the health rooms, we created a space so that they're separated a little bit from other students to try to prevent any kind of spread. Learning environments. So we've already done an initial survey, and pending your action and feedback here this evening, we intend to do a follow-up, which would be one that would require much more of a commitment. But in analyzing the data that we've received and considering the data and those things that are in place, we do not recommend offering fully virtual options in grades 7 through 12. We recommend offering a fully virtual option for parents who would want that in grades 5K through 6. We have decided, based on last year's experience, not to offer fully virtual for 4K. But if in this survey, then that would go out, we must meet minimum section sizes to make it feasible for us to offer those sections. So the number we're working with is approximately 25 students. And in those cases, it may be where teachers are doing multi-grade based on the level of demand, such as like a 5K first grade, a first grade / second grade. And those would be dedicated sections in those cases. But again, if we only have a handful of students, we can't justify allocating the staffing for very small sizes. So we would follow with the survey and determine if there is feasibility for providing that option only in grades 5K through 6 to offer that. Emergency remote learning, which is something that we offered this last year, again, would be provided for any individual students placed in quarantine. So that's that virtual learning piece where students would continue to receive that instruction while they're completing quarantine. Temporary virtual learning remains an option. We certainly have great reason for optimism, but we can't predict with any certainty exactly what's going to happen. So if we were to experience some wave or spike of infection, the option of temporarily moving groups like we had to do at times this past year into virtual learning would be there, and then we would provide that virtual learning until students would return to in-person. Hope we don't ever have to use that, but it's on there as an option. There is a note in here about students' access to technology, which is a critical piece in supporting that as a strategy. Grades 2 through 12, students will have school-issued Chromebooks that they can take with them. Students in 4K through first could certainly request, those families could request a device be issued if necessary, if a device was not utilized in the home. And then there's just a couple of pieces on operations that day-to-day responsibility for decision-making would be delegated to the superintendent. In terms of making those decisions, substantial changes to PSD, COVID-19 operational plan, masking, substantial longer-term learning environment changes, those things, then those would be brought to the Board of Education for approval. So those are the pieces of the plan. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Mike, when do you plan that survey to go out, and how might that impact or modify this plan?
Yeah, we would be looking to push that survey out hopefully by the end of this week. Got to work with Candace on that, pending your action tonight, and then within the next couple of weeks get that data back, because then principals would have to go to work creating those sections. And we'd want parents to know with as much notice as possible if we're able to offer that environment or not.
Larry?
I have a couple of questions relative to the participation and the involvement of the Waukesha County Health Department. And then secondly, also, I know that you guys did a lot of work last year with the other schools in the Waukesha County area. So what role will the Waukesha County Health Department play? And are they still involved in helping with some of the data collection and capturing the information related to contact tracing, et cetera? So
Yeah, we have not been meeting regularly like we were previously. We've had some discussion with a follow-up meeting in the next week or two with Waukesha County Health Department and Waukesha County Superintendents. So that's to be scheduled in the next 2 weeks. Just to kind of compare and get recent guidance, I did reach out to Waukesha County Health just to confirm a few things in terms of their current recommendations, which are reflected in what I've presented to you. So I wanted to make sure that we were checking with them in terms of if anything had changed, and so they're still there as a resource, but not a whole lot's changed since the end of the school year.
Are we doing any tracking of this as we go through the summer school sessions? Any kids or teachers or things?
Yeah, we have, similar to kind of what we're talking about in the school year, in terms of contact tracing, those things are there, but we haven't had any cases. So it's been really, it's been really smooth. It's been great. Yep.
Anything else, Larry?
No, thank you.
Steve?
I have a couple of questions related to a specific concern. And my specific concern is kids being confrontational and bullying behavior, both sides, right? So I will see that, I'm certain that kids who think that masks shouldn't be worn will bully kids who are wearing masks, and kids who are wearing masks will bully kids who aren't. And my concern is specifically around the language of recommended. And I'm worried that some kids will use that as a weapon to bully kids who decide that they don't want to wear a mask. And my question that comes from that is the CDC did publish recommendations, or did publish guidance that says that they recommend unvaccinated people to be wearing masks when indoors, but they also said in their guidance that school districts are called on to use local health data to guide decisions about when to tighten and relax preventative measures like mask wearing and physical distancing. And they were confident that this approach would work even with the highly contagious Delta variant. So my question is, should we not consider a multiple tiered option for the 4K through 6 students that reflects the level of COVID activity in our community, and in making judgments about when do we say optional versus recommended?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Steve. We certainly could do that. We could certainly use optional language and still communicate, here's what public health recommends. So there's a variety, I mean, it's really a communication strategy as much as anything. I understand your point.
Yeah.
We could certainly look at that as a strategy or as, you know, a lever in the plan, right? And if things started to tick up, if you went from optional to, we've seen an increase in local disease burden, so we would move to recommended status. So that's a very reasonable idea, certainly something we could make as a modification to the plan. Again, today's data looks great. I think in our census tract, I think we're at 0 cases at the moment in the last 7 days. It's kind of, you know, varied between 0 to 3 or 4 on the high end in like the last 5-6 weeks. So it's been very, very positive, and to your point, when it's that low, you know, and all those disease burden models are in the green. But if some start moving to yellow or something like that, that could be a strategy, and I think that's a reasonable approach.
I would ask that we take that approach personally. That's just my stand on the situation. I just don't want to give weapons to people to beat each other over the head
Right,
with,
yeah.
At least possible.
And we have heard that concern from parents, again, on both sides, right?
Yep.
My kid wore a mask and was teased, and my kid didn't wear a mask and was teased. And, you know, that's something that we certainly, in our communication with the plan, you know, really want to partner with parents to help us with that messaging at home, that look, you know, this is family decision-making that's happening here. It's okay. If someone's wearing one, it's okay if someone's not wearing one, and we're not to be teasing people if they have a different choice than us. So that's something in our communication I think we can really emphasize and look for the support with our families. But I understand, you know, when you use a term like recommended, it might add a little something to that, so.
Thanks, Mike, for
Yep.
your consideration of that.
Other questions for Mike? Stacy?
I support Steve's proposal on having that tiered approach, and I appreciate a communication out to the families about bullying. I also would like to encourage direct discussion about it with our staff in the summer before school starts. It seems to me it would go without saying, but who are we to make that assumption? I mean, I just think that it needs to be addressed with the staff, and goes back to.
Stacy, could you lean into your microphone a little bit?
I'm
I'm not sure
sorry.
if Jackie's getting you
I wasn't
totally for
turning
the
it.
live stream.
It goes back to
Yep.
even in the spring when we discussed this, that it gives the teachers time now to do this and the families time to prepare for it, to minimize that bullying aspect. So I think that would be great. Mike, I do have one question.
Yep.
That just occurred to me as you were going over this. Could you go into a little bit more specifics about the cohorting in the elementary schools? When it says scheduling will be modified to reduce interaction of different groups of students. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so you might, in completely typical times, have assemblies with multi-grade students. You might hold off on that at the start because you're keeping, you know, Mrs. Smith's class, maybe having less interaction with Mrs. Jones' classes so that you're having less cross section exposure. That was a strategy that was used quite a bit last year in the middle school. It's like kind of keeping to your houses a little bit during that time. So that just limits, you know, what it really does is if you do have a case, it can really limit the people impacted by contact tracing and quarantine. Again, certainly we have a reduced intensity with that, with non-symptomatic not being quarantined unless at parent request. But that's really kind of how that works. It just, you know, there were extra recesses that were built into the schedule last year, so fewer kids were out there at a time. It's just, again, a practical strategy to reduce kind of that cross exposure
Does it
component.
impact use of makerspace or art rooms, music rooms, anything like that? Does it alter anything like that?
No, not really, because that's, and you can jump in if you have something different, Danielle. It really, usually that's going to be your class that goes in there, more so than it's going to be multiple cross classroom interaction.
And we anticipate full, going back fully with the fine arts? You know, I know a lot of that had to be.
They were at the end of the year, we're all
Okay.
back in the classrooms, because to your point, earlier in the year, the art teachers were going out to the classrooms, but, you know, by post-spring break probably, if not earlier, they were going to the art and the music rooms.
Okay, all right, and like the band will be able to be the band again? And Good, okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Steve, did you offer a specific change to the program we're looking at here?
I could, if it would be helpful to.
Well, I wasn't
I'm not
really sure what you wanted.
Yeah.
Well, what I captured, if you want me to give it a try, Steve, is that for that 4K through 6 environment, it would be a masking optional with looking at some tiered, if cases increase, then masks recommended would be kind of a step up. It would be, again, maybe a strategy that we could build in, and we just kind of build in a tier for that.
That's exactly what I'm looking for, Mike, is some sort of a specific threshold at which we move from an optional environment to a recommended environment. And as you outlined very clearly, giving you the ability to say, hey, we're even going further than that if we exceed, you know, a certain threshold of COVID case rates in the community or in the schools. I'm not sure if the community measure is better than rate in the school itself. I'm sort of open to both ideas around that, but I think some sort of a threshold makes sense, given where we're at as a community, as you noted, that the data I look at regularly says we're averaging about 1 case a week in Pewaukee.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're hopeful and optimistic that will continue, but what we
Right.
found last year to your, you know, I think the community rates are becoming maybe a little bit more useful because they quickly became not useful last year because they were just all bright red all the time.
Yeah, right.
So and we couldn't really make decisions off of that. So then it got to be very much about our internal experience. And so certainly we're gonna, if we have situations where there is some kind of outbreak or something like that, we're gonna have to have some kind of response, whether that's a move to temporary virtual or things of that nature. So there's gonna have to be some flexibility to be responsive.
Just to be clear, everybody understand that change he's suggesting? Okay, Larry?
One question relative to the federal requirement on buses, is that something you're kind of implying that it might go away, or is it something that we have to address?
I haven't heard any discussion about it. That's a current federal mandate that we don't have any control over. What I indicated in the proposed plan was that if the mandate goes away, then we would just have the bus environment reflect what we're doing in school. So
Right
if,
now, kids getting on the bus, wear a mask, off the bus.
that's the federal requirement right now.
Talk to your federal legislators, folks.
All right, other questions for Mike on the plan?
Other than Steve's wording, do we need to change anything on specific document under that 4-6 or 4K to 6 grade?
I think we can capture it in the minutes.
Well, no, I want to see it changed in the document.
Okay, well, it would be.
Because this is the public document that we're going to bring forward. It's what's going to be published and posted, right?
It'll be published and posted. I would probably need a little time to, define what the tier would be in terms of that nuance from optional to, if you're comfortable, it's not a massive change. It's just, again, in both cases, it remains a parent choice. Whether it makes sense if the disease burden goes to a certain range, or if we have a certain number of cases in a school or something like that we go to a recommended status. Really, as much as anything, it's a communication strategy to kind of alert parents that, we've had an increase, we would, recommend a use of face covering because of this data. So if you're comfortable with me working on what that might be,
Or Larry, would you want to move to table it for the next meeting?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Just as long
We
as
really-
We make sure that we
yeah.
have it documented, because it's something that's going to be posted out there, and we don't have another board meeting officially, I think, until in August, right? So.
Correct. So again, it would be some level of increased concern, right, in infection
As Steve
within
said, it's like a threshold,
the school
some threshold
environment.
we reach.
And it would be the nuance of changing from a optional masking environment, and we're talking 4K through 6, until they have access to vaccination, because then it's really an optional environment, right? So I think that's something that we could, that would be a pretty easy tweak to the plan.
Any other questions? All right. Well, as changed by Steve, I will need a motion here.
So I move to approve the 2021-22 COVID operational plan with modification to the guidance for the 4K through 6 grade levels to implement a tiered strategy for optional masking versus recommended masking language in its final published form.
Second.
All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
So we'll do a communication out so I'll make those adjustments. I can put that out, just so that you can see it in case you have any questions. Again, I don't think it'll be, real substantial. And then we'll get a communication out to families, in terms of what the board action was and what the plan is, and get that survey moved out in the next few days.
Next up is the policy committee. I'm going to turn it over to Jeannie.
Okay, we started with 5700.05 children of divorced or separated parents. And the only thing that we did there is we changed, or we kind of added to where it says parent or guardian as defined by the Wisconsin state statute. Just so there's no questions on who would be a guardian.
Any questions, or are you good for next time? All right, thank you, Jeannie. Next.
Okay. 2000.07, resolving stakeholder concerns. We made absolutely no changes on this one. This was just up for review in a 5-year cycle.
Everybody good? All right.
And then, our next one was 6500.10, technology acceptable use policy. The only change we made on there was just kind of checking some of the grammar, because in one case it said that we would ban students if they went above and beyond what the, let me grab my printed copy here, because I just lost my place. If they consumed more than an unreasonable amount, well, that really doesn't make sense, because it's kind of a double. So as we consume more than a reasonable amount. So we just cleaned up some of the language a little bit. And for those of you who were actually paying attention to my policy committee, we also had 6200.02 special education services. We tabled that. We decided we needed some procedures to go with that.
All right.
Yeah, and that's been forwarded to Mr. Stranke to work on, just some procedures to go along with the policy.
So 6510, everybody's okay going forward? All right, fantastic. Is there anything else, Jeannie?
Nope, that was it.
All right, thank you. Moving down to personnel issues, we have no resignations at the time, but we do have an employment.
Yes, we have a 5K teacher who I was able to interview last week with Mr. Siegel. I was really impressed with her. Morgan, and I'm sure probably not pronounce Morgan's name correctly, so if Morgan were here, I'd apologize to her in person. Morgan Ceccatinini. Boy, I really butchered that one.
Yeah.
That was bad. So I'm sorry, Morgan, if you're watching on live stream, that I did not pronounce your name well at all. But I would take any questions you have, but seek your approval of Morgan as the new 5K teacher at
Move to approve.
Pewaukee Lake.
Second.
All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Yeah, welcome, Morgan. What's her name? All right, we have no leave requests, so that goes down to board goals and operations. Like we were pointing out just a minute ago, our next meeting is until August 9th. It's going to be a busy night. That's the annual meeting, so we're going to start early. Business affairs at 6, regular meeting 6:30, budget hearing and annual meeting. And there were some folks that were going to have trouble getting there. Who are those folks? Larry, were you one?
Yeah, I have an out-of-town.
So, but we'll have enough for a quorum, won't we? Okay, fantastic. The 16th, we're having the new teacher program. We're changing it up this year a bit. We're going to do a breakfast. Isn't that right, Mike?
Right, so a little switch from the board lunch with new staff to a breakfast with the staff, so that's the change. Danielle's been Robin Wilson's has taken charge of the new teacher induction, so she's got some fresh ideas with how that week goes.
Mike, did you want us there at 7:30 already, or just for the 9:15 breakfast part?
Danielle, do you have a?
Just the 9:15 portion is fine.
Okay.
Then the annual Welcome Back to Everybody breakfast on the 23rd of August. September 13th, we got business affairs and the regular meeting, and then policy won't meet between now until September 27th, where they'll meet at 6 on the 27th of September, regular meeting at 7. So, anybody know of anything else going on, WASB or anything that we should know
Yes,
about?
on
Okay.
July 24th, sorry, they're doing a Saturday leadership workshop in Green Bay. I will be attending that on that Saturday, so.
Okay. All right, fantastic. Anything else? All right. Legislative advocacy update. Anybody have anything they would like to share about what's going on in Madison? We've got a budget that's been approved, so does that answer all your history questions here, John?
We have enough information to know where we stand going into the annual meeting now, and we'll just be working on, once we get clarification on several items, that how they would be implemented.
All right, fantastic. Anybody else have anything to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, that was the big news, that the legislature passed a budget and the governor signed it. We had no idea for sure what was going to transpire there. So there's still some details, I think, that are up in the air with some of the money that was moved around with line item vetoes, and whether or not anything from a school funding standpoint will change. But, you know, at least we do have the, certainly the knowledge of at least what we're looking at for the biennium, because, you know, there's been years where it's went darn near into October before we would have the biennium passed, and we're kind of flying blind, so.
Nice to know early.
Yeah, it is.
All right, with that, then we move down to Board of Education goal setting. Larry, you've sort of led that charge for a number of
Yes.
years here.
Just again, we haven't said anything official. Obviously, we work very, very closely with coming up with superintendent and board goals somewhat simultaneously in terms of going forward with that. We know that we'll have some updates and revisions to our strategic plan document going forward, and looking forward to kind of getting a better handle on that, because you guys are actually in the active stages of doing that.
Yeah,
during your
we're,
Leadership Week.
Leadership Week, we're working on it.
Hopefully we get some feedback and comments in terms of doing that. Otherwise, again, if people are interested, usually we have a committee, subcommittee, 3 or 4 people try to get together to kind of review that. Steve has been one of those, I know Dacia in the past, but we're open to people joining us, and we could gladly go through and kind of talk about what's there and ideas and suggestions for combinations of both the board goals and the superintendent goals going forward, so.
I'd be happy to participate again, Larry. Thank you.
Sure.
Dacia too? Okay.
Dacia?
All right, there's a committee. Anybody else have a desire to jump on there, or got to worry about quorums
We might
now,
actually be
but-
able to go back to Panera's this year, too.
Yeah, you could go to Panera.
That would be
yeah.
nice.
Tradition.
And have
Go
coffee.
back to tradition, yeah.
Mike, or Brian, can you have 4?
Probably be better not to, but.
That's what I was thinking, okay.
If you would rather,
I wouldn't rather,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
You're
Yeah.
welcome, Stacy.
All right, with that, we'll move on to comments from citizens. I've got 3 more cards here. Kelly Belt.
I'm back.
She's back.
Just some questions on the COVID policy. How recommended, when you spoke in May, the recommended, your teachers were still going to have to wear them if they were recommended. So are unvaccinated teachers still going to have to wear if it's a recommended policy?
Yeah, good question, Kelly. Thank you for asking it so we can clarify. No. It would be, because we're not going to be checking their vaccination status.
Okay.
Again, it's, the point of the recommended was purely just to kind of parrot what's out there as a public health recommendation, but leave it up to individual choice, whether that be parent or the employee.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Yep.
And then is there a plan as far as board review on the policy as we move forward? Because I know you're keeping up with the day-to-day, but is there a plan for board review every month, every 2 months, or anything like that, just to keep in touch with what's going on?
Yeah, what we would intend to do is have a regular report at every board meeting, like we did last year. And certainly, there's kind of a built-in piece here in this recommendation to really that change from the no access to full access to vaccine. So there's a little bit of an automatic piece that's in there. And really, once you're in that status, you're very close to just normal operations. You're just really monitoring metrics, and if you happen to have a positive, you're contact tracing. If anything substantial would happen for anything, for longer term, like we need to change a learning environment or more, let's say our nightmare happens, and it would certainly be mine, that we have some substantial outbreak and we have to do things more substantial, we may even consider convening a emergency meeting of the board to make those decisions, because I know that was a concern. That was pretty clear at the end of last year. I do need flexibility to operate day to day and respond to things, but that would be the approach. And the board members certainly jump in if you would have anything to add or like to see something different.
think that would be sufficient from my perspective, Mike.
You know, Kelly, I'd
yes.
also like to add that if there is a change, say there's just one house that needs to be put on virtual, Mike does notify the entire board immediately.
Okay. And then, in regards to the cohorts, now last year because of cohorting and distancing and things like that, the school day was shortened. You had to apply for a waiver for PE minutes. So where does that lead us? Is the school day going to be shortened again? Are we going back to normal there? Again, is there going to be PT waivers?
Another good question, and I appreciate you bringing it up. So, the part of the shortened day was because we had staggered bus routes. We did a separate Horizon and PLE, but we're not doing that this year, so we won't have the shortened day. The PE minutes was purely a middle school piece because we were not in full attendance and we were in that hybrid, and so we did that kind of A-B block where we just ran A blocks for a quarter.
Right.
And then B, so that requirement that you had PE every week, we couldn't do it, so that should not be an issue.
Okay. I think that was it.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Kelly. Appreciate it.
Next, we have Stan Sekulowski.
Hello, Stan Sekulowski. I have 3 children in the district. Heard me speak before. This is more just questions. I think you guys have done a really good job. I think there's a lot of things that we have done in the past year that have been really good. I mean, taking the improving the ventilation system while they're in the middle of fixing the schools, I thought that was phenomenal. The contact tracing, the cohorts, I mean, some of the stuff that we were proactive about, I thought we were top notch. I thought that was great. We're at a different spot now. COVID, we know what COVID is now. We know what works, what doesn't work. We kind of know masking is not really 100% effective, and it actually does a little more damage for our kids psychologically and emotionally and other things. And so I'm fairly certain, as we're all saying in this room, that we're not running back to masks, but I am concerned that we might do that because it was easy enough to run to it and it worked so well the first time. My concern does run to this, the flu versus the cold versus the vid. What are we going to, I mean, so if we have an outbreak of something, what is our protocol going to be for that? That's one of my concerns. But I'm going to play the flip coin on that as well. When can we be done with this? Is there a game plan in mind for that where we can say, hey, we can go back to not having cohorts and we can kind of go back to this regular life and be able to do things normally? I really hope there's a game plan for that as well. And I'm thinking with the reevaluations you're saying, at least quarterly with our meetings here, that we can have that kind of forward thinking like we've been doing, that we can be proactive to get back to normal as quickly as we possibly can for the betterment of our kids. The last thing I did want to bring up, and my daughter did whisper this in my ear, we all kind of think that the bullying was the ones that were wearing the masks, but I can really tell you the bullying, especially around some of the kids I've heard, was the ones who didn't wear the masks. So when you're having that communication with the students and with the parents, let's make sure this is a two-way street on both ways, the masking and the unmasking, because I just think it should be for everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. We have heard both. We absolutely have heard that kind of teasing, bullying stuff happens both ways. And, I think, Stacy, you talked about making sure that we address it with teachers ahead of time. And we talked about how important partnering, again, as it always is important to partner with parents to help with that messaging to our kids so that we have kind of that respectful environment. And to your initial kind of question, again, I can't say when it's 100%, everything's gone, we're not doing metrics or those kinds of things. I think we're going to progress towards that. But in the plan, once you hit, that 2 months past that vaccine eligible date with the cohorting and those things drift, those go away because it moves into that same category as the high school and 7th and 8th grade are right now. So it's designed to progressively drop some of these mitigation pieces. And then I think some of it, we'll have to, I don't know, I've never come out of a pandemic totally before. I'm not exactly sure when it's done. I hope it's soon.
Right. I do have one other quick thing to add on to this. It's one thing, we've talked about a lot of other proactive things with the masking, social distancing, and things of that nature, but one of the other huge things that we can teach our children and our families is to be healthy. Make sure they have the right vitamins, the D, the C, living healthy lifestyles, practicing. I mean, one of the coolest things that I heard today, 83% of our student population is participating. That's huge. That is really phenomenal. And to the gentleman that spoke earlier, that's my hat's off to him. healthy lifestyle and being involved is awesome. So, but I think the other thing we could do, part of the communication is make sure being healthy and getting the right nutrition in our diets to make sure we can fight whatever comes our way. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Stan.
Charla?
Hi,
Hello
Charlie.
again. Okay, I have a couple questions. So the WIAA requirements for like quarantining, so will that apply to all sports or only the WIAA approved ones by Pewaukee?
Jeff, you want to jump in? Yeah, so for example, Charlotte, when we changed to the, at the end of the year,
Yeah,
we had to notify our athletes for state tournament procedures and those things that they had to, even for basketball, right? They had to
Sure.
do, we had moved on to a 7-10 day, but that WIA required that for those athletes, they had to do a 14 day. So we implemented our own with their athletes, except for postseason.
okay. My other question, with the new policy, like quarantining or high school policies, since they're not, it's basically optional, will the schools, high school be going back to having assemblies and like that kind of stuff?
We haven't talked about indoor assemblies and those things yet, but yeah, I would think that's the intention.
Like, yeah, like assemblies, I mean, obviously,
Yes.
when it's nice outside, obviously, if they could go outside, that'd be great.
Right.
Dances, also that kind of stuff too, depending
Yeah,
where we're at.
we're hoping to be running homecomings and all that kind of
Okay.
stuff. I mean, honestly, we haven't had specific conversations about those, but that's certainly the intent.
Okay. And my other question is do we know how much virtual learning costs the Pewaukee School District?
I don't know that we've quantified it. I mean, in reality, was virtual learning more expensive? I don't know that it was because the biggest cost is staffing. And so we didn't have substantial increases to staffing to support virtual learning. So we'd have to do some digging on that to see what the cost was. But, and I know you and I have had some conversations about this previously, that's why we, for virtual learning as an option for families who may want that, we would have to have those section minimums. That's really ultimately what would drive the cost because, so let's say we said, we're gonna run it and we only had 10 kids per section, it's gonna increase class sizes for in-person, and it's not gonna be a efficient allocation of staffing, so that's why the minimum section sizes should really offset or mitigate any cost
So the
differential.
minimum section size is 25. Is that what I understood?
Yeah, approximately
So
25
if it's
students, right.
So it'll be kindergarten and first graders, so we have to have 25 kindergartners and first graders.
Well, it could be, say we had 25 kindergartners, then we could run a kindergarten
Right.
section. What we're saying is so we may have 13 kindergarten kids and 12 first graders, we can do a section.
Okay,
We're gonna be able to provide that for those families who want it, so then we could allocate a teacher that would teach cross-grade level.
okay. Yeah, because I'm just curious what the cost is then for those running that compared to those who choose to do virtual going to eAchieve, K-12
Yeah.
Connection, one of those.
Theoretically, it really shouldn't change any cost because we're not adding teachers to do it, we're just reallocating. So we're not hiring another teacher. So a teacher, instead of teaching an in-person section, would teach a virtual section. So it's
Okay.
not really it's not a big cost driver
Okay.
to do that, which is why the section size minimums are important, because otherwise, ultimately, you would be looking at hiring more teachers.
Cool, that's all
Okay.
I want to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good questions, thanks, Charlie.
The last card I have is for Julie Westfall.
Hi there.
Hi, Julia.
How are you guys?
Good, you?
Just living the dream. I have a question. I'm going to tag on to what Charlotte just brought up. Have we looked at, and just because I've wasted a lot of time this week at work with this. Have we looked into pen testing and cybersecurity? Whenever computers are, remotely accessing the school's network, and with the increase of hacking that's been going on, it may be a time to maybe take a look at doing some more testing from a cybersecurity standpoint. The biggest thing is, while a kid may accidentally or intentionally, play a video game on their computer or access something that you thought was blocked and wasn't blocked, trust me, it changes hourly, daily, minutely. It winds up that, that's suddenly can be a huge concern for the whole cyber security of the school. So take a look at that. Maybe with John's sweet little nest egg he always manages to help us have, we could afford to do some pen testing. That'd be great.
Yeah, I appreciate the recommendation. It's something that I know the IT department's always, with the firewalls and those things, they're constantly monitoring the security standpoint, because when students, and even when devices are at home, and they take them, even when we're not in this situation, we have a one-to-one take-home, so those things are kind of built in, but it is hard to always stay in front of it, so it's.
And with a much larger, much more robust IT team than what you guys have, corporations are
Sure.
having it happen nonstop,
Yep.
and government is really being pushed. So I would just make that recommendation to stay ahead of it. If we have the finances, we should take a look at being proactive on that front. The other item I wanted to bring up was a thank you to our amazing teachers and staff. I am impressed at the end of this crazy time. My kids are doing ACT prep testing. I'm that jerk mom that made them take algebra camp or, some horrible camp all through school. And they, my daughter just, on the writing portion, just pulled a 33. So it is impressive to see what they're capable of. And she's only going into her junior year, so this is incredible. And it's really something that's commendable on the staff here. It really, truly is wonderful. And I also wanted to say that goes for everybody, not only just the teachers, but the staff. The fact that John has a little nest egg when a crazy epidemic comes out of nowhere, that we're able to react to that, and we're able to have the capability where a lot of schools didn't have that. So just incredible staff, incredible teams. So thank you to them. And one last thing I did want to say, and this was just as I listened today again, I just wanted to say, I know it's easy. People right now are listening to react, not listening to understand. And I want to remind everybody that you guys, Dr. Katie, Dr. Bosanic, all of the amazing teachers and staff here have the right to privacy. They have the right to their own lives, their own clubs, their own personal activities outside of these four walls. And I think we should just remember that before we get up and speak or say something from the audience, that it's absolutely okay for these people to have their own lives and to be private about that. They don't have to share everything about their life is not open to you.
Thank you.
Or us.
Thank you, Julie. You got one more, I think, Brian?
I have one from Megan, but there's no last name and no address.
Megan, could you just maybe say your first and last name and address or just confirm that you're a Pewaukee resident, please?
I'm a Pewaukee resident.
Okay.
I have
Thank you.
a class of 2024 child, so that's what I'll give you.
Okay, thank you, Megan.
So I heard something earlier that,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your last name.
I'm not going to give it, and I'll tell you why in just a second. I think Mike recognizes me, as will half the audience.
I recognize Megan as a parent.
So something was said earlier that I really felt compelled to walk away from my dinner and come in, because I think maybe other parents need an education. I'm the parent of a transgender child. That child is going to look like a normal child to you, they're not going to have a sign on their head. And being the parent of a transgender child, you start to go through an education that other people aren't going to have. So I wanted to start to share with you all as school board members how this looks for a child who identifies as transgender. So there was a question, how would you feel knowing a member of your sports team is someone of the other gender? Well, that's really easy to answer. You wouldn't feel anything because you wouldn't know. A child who is transgender usually identifies as a child and starts talking about this as a child. And as a child, I mean developmentally as a child before adolescence. So when a child is as out as they're going to be playing sports, look backwards from that. Let's say they're playing sports, they're playing on the opposite gender's team. If you look backwards from that, you're going to find a transgender child who is so out that they're out to their parents, they're out to their physician, and what their physician is going to do is put them on puberty blockers before puberty even starts. So you have a child born with a penis, you refer to him as a boy, but at the age of 9, they've started puberty blockers. Their voice isn't going to deepen, they're not going to be developing the same kind of body hair as other boys their age. So if they feel like a female and they don't have the same hormones as a boy, they're gonna try to participate in probably a sport that identifies with how they identify. If you were to test the hormones of all the other girls on the team, they're gonna be a little different from each other and from that child who's taking a puberty blocker, because that's the whole point of a puberty blocker, to prevent them from going any further into puberty. So they're probably gonna continue to look like a child. You can only stay on puberty blockers for a decade or so. We have lots of research to show that that's acceptable. The next step for them is gonna be transitioning to hormones. The whole point of a puberty blocker is to give the child and the family time to figure out what the steps are that works for them. By the time you encounter a child as a transgender child as an adult, they've likely gone through a medical transition and they're going to begin to physically present as the gender they mentally identify with. So as the parent of a transgender child, I share this for you to start to understand what it is that a transgender child is going through, but also to say thank you to Pewaukee, because my child, when they came out, we mentioned something sort of in passing to the school counselor, who immediately said, "Oh, we can accommodate this. We have things in place to make sure that your child is identified and included," because we're about inclusion here, right? My child has never felt ostracized or left out. They aren't having the mental health break that comes along with being constantly referred to as she or he, when mentally they don't refer to themselves that way. So using the gender-neutral language has saved my child's mental health. So whoever made that decision and authorized the change, thank you, because it's allowing my child to stay somewhat sane and stay in school. So I hope that we can continue to have more dialogue about what this is like. There's the start of our education.
Thank you, Megan.
All right. Next, we have to take a roll call vote to go into closed session, according to state statute 19.85, paren 1, paren C, having to do with salaries and contracts of employees and teachers and administrator evaluation and compensation. So I look for a motion to go into closed session under that statute.
So moved.
Second.
All right, roll call. Ann?
Yes.
Jeannie?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Larry?
Yes.
Stacy?
Yes.
Tasha?
Yes.
And Brian votes yes as well. We are now in closed session.
Are we going here where we did last time?
Back. First thing is the teacher salaries that are on there. So somebody want to,
Make a motion to approve a new teacher compensation approve a teacher compensation system as presented for the 2021-22 contract year that will provide supplemental pay for all regular full-time and regular part-time professional employees employed by the district, including but not limited to certified full and part-time teachers as defined.
Second.
all right. Was that Ann? Jeannie, okay. All right, moved and second, all in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. All right,
Move to approve the offering of a new individual administrator contract for the 2021-23 contract term as presented.
Second,
Who got that one?
me. Stacy, sorry.
all right, moved and seconded, all in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, one last motion to make.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Okay, Larry, I think, Steve, you